necessity. It's a choice, and choices always stem from beliefs. So this is why I use the term Carnism to describe the ideology or belief system, ideology is a belief system, in which it's considered ethical to eat certain animals. If we don't name Carnism, it makes eating animals seem like it's a given rather than a choice. And I also say carnist to describe a person who follows the tenets, the teachings of Carnism. It only makes sense if we have a name for vegans and vegetarians that we have a name for people who follow a different belief system. We tend to assume it's only vegans and vegetarians who bring our beliefs to the dinner table, but most people don't, for example, love dogs but eat pigs because they don't have a belief system when it comes to eating animals. Now, Carnism is not meant to be a pejorative term. It's simply descriptive, like Buddhist, raw foodist, socialist, capitalist. If people consider this a negative, it's probably because on some level they consider eating animals a negative. Now, Carnism is a special type of ideology. It's a dominant ideology. It's invisible, it's entrenched, it shapes beliefs, behaviors, norms, laws, etc. And it's also a violent ideology in that it is literally organized around physical violence. Meat cannot be procured without slaughter. And dominant violent ideologies use a set of social and psychological mechanisms to enable humane people to participate in inhumane practices without fully realizing what they're doing. Carnism teaches us how not to feel. What Carnism does is it blocks our awareness of what psychologists refer to as cognitive moral dissonance. Cognitive moral dissonance is the internal moral discomfort we feel when our values are not in alignment with our practices. And we all experience this. It's simply a matter of degree. When it comes to eating animals, clearly there's a conflict here. And I'm going to share with you a quote from one of my research participants, a carnist, who had been talking about, very comfortably, about the different types of food she eats and prepares and her experience eating and preparing these foods. And when I asked her about eating meat, she got emotional. And here's an excerpt of what she said to me. And you can read this for yourself. Oh, that's right, I'm sorry. Okay. I mean, there are so many mortifying things in our culture and society, but killing animals for food certainly is one of the worst. And people ignore it the most because they think that animals don't matter. I feel a lot for these animals. Just the thought is really upsetting. I'm crying. And she started to cry as she was talking to me. So when we experience cognitive moral dissonance, it's a discomfort, and we seek to alleviate it. And in order to do this, we have three choices. We can either change our self-concept. We can change our core value system. What this means is we can say, yeah, I suck. I'm a bad person. I don't care about animals, and, so be it. I'm evil. And research shows us that this is not going to happen to 99% of the people, and I don't know why they needed to conduct research on this, but we do have empirical evidence to show that everybody needs to believe that they're living a moral life. We all need to feel this way. So if we're not going to change our self-concept, what can we change? What do you think?
Behavior.
Well, one thing you can change is your behavior, and in this case it would mean you could stop eating animals, and there's no more conflict. But as you probably know, most people do not do this. And so there's a third option, which is to change our perception of our behavior, and it's around this third option that Carnism is organized. This is the mentality of me. Now, I have told you that Carnism uses social and psychological defenses to maintain itself. The primary defense of the system is invisibility. And the primary way it stays invisible is by remaining unnamed. If we don't name it, we can't talk about it. We can't talk about it, we can't question it, we can't challenge it. Like I've said, meat eating seems like a given rather than a choice, just the way things are. But Carnism also maintains invisibility by keeping the victims of the system out of sight and conveniently out of public consciousness. And there are many different groups of invisible victims. The first group, most of, if not all of you are aware of here, and don't worry, there's no gore in this presentation. I actually saved that for the presentations I give to carnists. They need to see it, you don't. Is the non-human victims. 10 billion non-human victims every year. This is land animals alone, not even including fish and other sea life. I just couldn't resist. I don't know how this happened.
Is that a
and I think it's even a golden retriever. I guess we all have our preferences, right? And that little chick looks so jealous. And they're projecting. And of course, our environment is an invisible victim. In 2007, the UN issued a report stating that animal agriculture is one of the most significant contributors to the most serious environmental problems facing the world today. Carnism is a system of victimization. It victimizes all of us, everyone, everything on the planet. Slaughterhouse workers and meat packers, most of whom are non-English speaking immigrants, legal or illegal, who have to work in a highly dangerous, death-saturated environment day in and day out, and not surprisingly have high rates of addiction and post-traumatic stress, are also victims of the system. And a couple of titles of OSHA, federal OSHA accident reports, I took 2 out of maybe 50 that I had, give you an idea of what they have to deal with for the people sitting in the back. One of them is employee hospitalized for neck laceration from flying blade, employee's arm amputated when caught in meat tenderizer. And again, I saved the worst of these for the carnists, so you can imagine. And in fact, in 2005, for the first time ever, Human Rights Watch issued a report criticizing a single U.S. industry, the meat industry, for working conditions so appalling they violate basic human rights. And we are the invisible victims of carnism. Whether we're vegan, vegetarian today, most of us grew up eating animals, and most people continue to eat animals. We pay for carnism with our health, as animal products consumption has been connected with the leading diseases in the Western world and the leading pandemic flus. We pay for carnism with our taxes, $7.64 billion per year to be exact, in meat subsidies, subsidies that have been criticized across the political spectrum as one of the most egregious corporate welfare programs in the history of the country. And we pay for carnism with our hearts and with our minds. Because in order to eat other animals, we have to disconnect. We have to shut down our empathy and block our awareness. And empathy and awareness are integral to our sense of self. But invisibility can only protect us so much. The system, hints of the truth surround us. For instance, the resilient vein in the drumstick, vegetarian guests at dinner parties, the hog on a spit at a company barbecue, and an endless supply of dead animals everywhere we turn in the form of meat. So when invisibility inevitably falters, the system needs a backup. It needs to teach us to justify eating animals. Now, there's a vast mythology surrounding meat, but all of these myths fall in one way or another under what I refer to as the 3 N's of justification, and many of you in this room might be, or probably all too painfully familiar with these. What do you think they are? Eating meat is... You probably heard it all before many, many times. Eating meat is normal, natural, and necessary. And, perhaps not surprisingly, these same myths have been used to justify violent ideologies throughout the course of human history. For the people in the back, slavery, male dominance, heterosexual supremacy. One myth is so particularly resilient that I just couldn't help mentioning it, the protein myth. And as we know, I rest my case. But the myths of meat persist, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And this is because so entrenched. When a system is entrenched, it's embraced and maintained by all of the major social institutions, from the family to the state. And I'm going to use a quote from a 19th century French political economist that I think sums this up quite well. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men and women living together in society, they create for themselves, in the course of time, a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. And when we're born into an entrenched system, we inevitably absorb the system's logic as our own. We internalize Carnism. We learn to see the world through the lens of Carnism. And Carnism teaches us to think and feel in certain ways that distance us from our emotions and distort our perceptions of meat and the animals that we eat so we can feel comfortable enough to consume them. For example, it teaches us to see animals as objects. So we refer to this, I used to say chicken, I think it might be turkey, I don't know, it's been that long, as something rather than someone. It's a lot easier to eat something than it is to eat someone. Or we call this little lamb, it, a thing, rather than he or she. Carnism teaches us to see animals as abstractions, as lacking in any individuality. We see them as nothing more than abstract members of a generalized group about which we've made stereotypical assumptions. A pig is a pig and all pigs are the same. Like other victims of violent ideologies, we give them numbers rather than names. And a good example of this is another quote from my doctoral research from a meat cutter who said to me, "I don't think of farmed animals as individuals. I wouldn't be able to do my job if I got that personal with them." When you say individuals, you mean as a unique person, as a unique thing with its own name and its own characteristics, its own little games that it plays? Yeah? Yeah, I'd really rather not know that. I'm sure it has it, but I'd rather not know it. Carnism teaches us to place animals in rigid categories in our minds so that we can harbor very different emotions toward different species and afford them a very different level of moral concern. And this is exemplified in a quote from a carnist I interviewed who told me quite openly that she eats all different types of meats. I was going through my checklist, you eat this, this, and this. When I got to veal, she paused and she responded, "Well, let's just say I came to your house and you told me that I had just eaten veal. I'd probably vomit. Like, I have to get that out of my system." And she made some heaving sounds that I couldn't figure out how to include in here. And when we look at the world through the eyes of Carnism, we fail to see the absurdities of the system. We see somebody selling themselves, carving themselves up, happily beseeching the viewer to eat them. We fail to see the horror. We fail to see the insanity of the system. But there is good news, and the good news